I don't think a normal human person thinks about the day that they decide enough is enough. I'm going to repeat that. I don't think the human brain ever thinks to itself when it's had enough. And what I mean by enough is that people will go decades, their whole life, just coasting by, just going through the motions. But in order for people to actually change and grow, something so profounding has to happen in order for there to be a reason and a justification to want change. Someone tries to tell you about your worst qualities. Are you going to listen to that person? Frankly put, no. I don't think it's reasonable to think that a random person knows exactly what's going through your mind. And in some cases, that is a good thought to have. I think that in an instance to where you are at your lowest point and you start reflecting on your life, only then can you actually figure out whether or not you want to change your life or not. And that kind of leads into the topic of tonight, I guess you could say, just showing up for yourself. Now, showing up for yourself is a lot of things that have to happen in order for you to be there for yourself. And I'll explain that later, but for right now, I kind of want to go into the psychology of the human brain of yourself. I think that when starting to show up for yourself, you kind of have to recognize when the negative self-talk is hindering your ability to process information or not. And in terms of the external world, when your brain processes outside information to such a degree that it is repeated like negative self-talk, it starts to kind of reinforce that idea. It starts to mold, it starts to take a hold in your soul. It tries to nurture this thought that isn't even real. I think that when you get a negative self-reflection, it's an instance where you can learn. It's an instance where you can change. And in that sense, you can do this idea that I like to do called positive reinforcement. And it's essentially just switching out a negative thought with a positive thought. So when you think about, I don't know how this video recording session is going to go. It could go any way. What if I don't do this as well as I want to? Instead of feeding that thought, you flip the narrative, you switch the script, and you basically tell yourself, how could I mess it up? It is my ability to make good videos. I've showed myself that I can make good videos. I've showed to myself that I have it in me to be able to do this hobby that I like to do right now. It's that mentality and it's that framework that makes you start to kind of appreciate life a little bit. It starts to make you look at things that you used to look a little bit Debbie Downerish and start looking at it in a different light, in a different perspective. Because the human psychology, your neuron pathways are so good at connecting the dots with whatever you feed it that if you do involve yourself in negative self-talk, if you do involve yourself in gossip, if you involve yourself in any type of degradation of the mind, you will eventually become that thought. And it gets to such a point where it's inseparable from your identity. You tend to latch onto that thought. You tend to have this notion, this degree that you think that you don't deserve anything, you know? It can get to very bad pipelines and it can get to very bad thought processes that takes years to re-switch, to rewire, if you will. It's also important to recognize when you do have positive self-talk. I think that repetition of successful, vivid self-talk can lead to good outcomes, because when you start to make space for those thoughts in your head about appreciating life, about appreciating the present moment, you tend to believe it. You know, it becomes like that, like a flip of the switch. Your neurons will adapt to the different stimuli, because now instead of trying to distinguish what's real and what's not real, you are saying what's real. You are practicing self-positivity. You are practicing this essence of being authentic. In instance, unlocking the future self that you are going to be living with means that in the present moment now, you have to be appreciative. You have to kind of stop and take a second to look at where you are and just appreciate, you know? I think what hinders a lot of people's ability to unlock their true self, the real you, I think what hinders a lot of people's progress in unlocking the true self is the emotional scars that we endure in our life. I think that in my kind of guideline, in my definition of what an emotional scar is, an emotional scar is this wound that we have endured in our life, and we create barriers to protect that wound. And in doing that, it protects our ego from getting hurt from that situation again. Now, let's say in an instance you get into a situation to where you don't come out okay, or at least come out okay in the sense of you lost a little bit of yourself before you happened to engage in the situation. Now, what you do, as far as I can see, as far as like emotional responses go, is you don't want to get hurt again. You don't want to put yourself in that place of vulnerability again. So what do? You put up walls. You put up these walls to protect yourself from getting hurt by that situation again. But when you do that, you only tend to hurt yourself. You're only protecting yourself from the person who originally hurt you. Because in putting up those walls, you're essentially blocking yourself off from human beings. You're blocking yourself from human connection. You're blocking yourself from having this ability to express yourself. You're cutting off an aspect of yourself. And I think that when we do that, it tends to spare our ego. We don't want to get our ego hurt in any situation, because it basically means that we as an individual to the outside world are not enough. It creates a situation to where you are essentially reinforcing the idea that you're not worthy of anything good in this life because you keep those walls up. Even as I sit here right now, I can recognize some of the emotional scars that I've endured in my 22 years of existence, but I think that in doing the hard work of trying to unlock my true self, unlock this person that is able to express themselves freely and openly with no type of judgment whatsoever, it's good to have that framework that even when I make this video and even when it's published, I can still go back and watch it. I think that I make these videos in such a way that even I can learn from them, because I recognize that there's always more to learn. With that framework, it allows you to start seeing the world differently, because you start looking at people as teachers. You start looking at the walls of reality itself as a mirror, because everything that you are not working on, or everything that you need to work on in order to unlock your true self, will be reflected back at you. I think a good framework to have when trying to unlock the true self is being self-reliant and self-assured. I take responsibility for everything that's happened in my life. And in doing that and accepting that responsibility, I have a better understanding about all the things that have happened in my life. And when I accept responsibility, reassures to myself that everything that I've gone through, I understand it completely. Everything that I've gone through, I got myself out of that situation. Everything that I've gone through that I take responsibility for, it reminds me that I still have a lot to work on. And it reminds me that I did it. I went through hell and back, and I came back just fine. I have a good head on my shoulders, and I will always reassure myself that I have that ability. It's that framework that also lets you recognize yourself for when you do good. It's that framework that reminds you that you are more than the sum of your parts. It's that framework that reminds you that there is more to you than just every little negative detail that you tell yourself. There's good in everybody. I really do believe that. I think it's possible for the subconscious mind to be fully aware when we speak to people. I think the problem comes with having emotions, thoughts, and expectations blur that vision. I think that all the situations where you replay thoughts in your head, where you argue with yourself as a stand-in for the other person and speak what you want to say consciously to yourself in the subconscious, that is what makes the thought real. It's the imprint that we're trying to rewrite. I think that in having that instantiation of anger towards ourselves, or rather having that thought be clouded by ourselves, we're usually tense. We're usually so caught up in how we feel that we tend to ignore what's going on in the body. I remember vividly that I would be at work and I would be having a bad day to the point where I had my brain tell me once that my shoulders were stiff. And that was when it hit in my head that I was letting the day consume me. That I was letting my thoughts cloud my judgment and that my subconscious was begging for something to give. And when you get to that point, it's already gotten to a point where it's affecting you, but there's still a way to heal it. You'd have to relax because you're fighting against a thought that shouldn't even be fought against. A thought is not real. I don't think that our own thoughts are real in a sense that what we tell ourselves and what we reinforce in our head is real. And so when you give yourself the opportunity to relax, when you give yourself the opportunity to breathe, when you give yourself the opportunity to look at the bigger picture than just yourself, your perspective, I can say that a lot of the times when I have a conversation and I truly am like in the zone, it's usually from a calm, collected mind. It's usually from an instance of knowing that I am in the zone, that I don't have anything distracting me to take away from this moment. In that sense, it's always better just to evaluate yourself in relation to your emotions, your thoughts, your actions, because they're not always reflective of who you are. Even in that moment that I stated, when I recognized that my shoulders were stiff, it was a reflection of how the day was treating me, that I was able to recognize and see the problem and adjust accordingly. And that's a skill that a lot of people don't have. I am of a rare breed of people that have understood themselves completely. At least that's what I'd like to think. But to be honest, I still have my moments. I still have moments of doubt. I still have moments to where I let the day consume me. It's a part of life, you know. I don't think anyone is perfect, and it's unrealistic to expect somebody else to be perfect when I'm not even perfect myself. All of that framework building that I've mentioned is what makes the difference between looking at success and looking at failure. That is the difference between looking at a happy life and looking at a bitter life. It's the difference between looking at the world with love and appreciation rather than looking at the world with hate in your heart. It's the difference between having total freedom of the mind and expression versus being confined in four walls. I had a person recently tell me that they appreciated that I was so in tune with myself, that I was able to snap myself into the present moment and look at what the bigger picture is. And I couldn't explain why. I think when it comes down to the framework that I've built up, it's self-acceptance. I don't think true happiness is gained until a person has gained self-acceptance. You know, I think that it's okay to recognize that you are not a perfect person, but I think the issue is that we tend to beat ourselves up about it. In reality, it's accepting that that is who you are. I think the fact of the matter is that I know that there's a lot of problems with myself that I'm trying to wrap myself around. I know that there are things that I'm working on as I speak right now that I won't share to people. But the fact of the matter is that I'm not going to beat myself up over that. And I'm not going to pick myself apart because of those shortcomings. At the end of the day, those are still me. Those feelings, those thoughts, that aspect, it's still me. And to deny the fact that they don't exist is denying myself that opportunity to grow from that. And that's what I mean by emotionally tolerating myself. Because that's what it is. It's emotional toleration of yourself and your shortcomings. That's where self-acceptance lies. Because to be able to recognize that you are okay with yourself is to recognize that you are okay with every part of yourself. The parts of yourself that you don't tell people. The parts of yourself that you don't share with the world. The parts of yourself that you feel that no one would accept. It's those ideas that you look at in the face and you tell yourself, I accept it, I see it for what it is, and I still choose the other direction. I won't fold to my brain. I won't succumb to the negative self-talk that I have. I won't fall for the same tricks that I used to fall for, because I know that I've made so much progress to that degree. You have to recognize that you are more than what you know, because to give yourself that space, that framework, to allow yourself to be in a specific environment, regardless of your upcomings, your shortbringings, your greatest strengths, that you are uniquely you, and no one can ever change that. No one's ever going to change me in the sense of what I've gone through, but I can lend an ear. I can listen to feedback. I can grow and change my perception because I know that learning from people is the goal of life. To be stagnant is to be complacent. And I don't want to be complacent ever again. Not again. I'll leave it off with this, and I'm going to ask you a question. I need you to think for once. You're not going to know when the time will be that you want to change your life. I can't tell you that. What I can tell you is when that thought does happen, whenever that may be ready for it. Because that thought is what creates the spark in your eyes. Because that thought is what allows you to create your future. The secret behind being present is recognizing that the future doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean that you don't carry a part of yourself into the future. And that part of you is the present. So when you think about where you're going to be in the next 5 years and you're not sure where, you're always going to have you. So if you can master yourself and master your thoughts and master what you want out of this life, then you'll be okay. I quit my job with no game plan and got hired at a place that I've loved in a month's time. Wherever I go in life, I'll be okay. I'll be okay because I have myself to rely on. I create the world I live in. If I want to see that world for what it could be, I need to keep myself in the present moment and carry that thought with me throughout my life. Just think on that and see where your brain goes.